Well, good evening, everybody. I think we can get started. Thank you for being here. This is the official opening of the 2019 budget. So hold on to your hat because there will be many steps between now and the completion of this, which will probably be sometime in mid-November. But under state law, we are required, or given the opportunity, depending on how you want to do it, to present our initial budget hearing to the public. And what this is going to be a summary of some of the challenges we face as a community. At the same time, we will be discussing, and not in great detail, but obviously if there's questions, we'll be able to answer those questions. Some of the issues that come up as a result of the budget parameters that have been set by Dennis Giacarino in the budget office. The way we work this is earlier this year, we put together a budget target. And letters went out to all the different departments of the city Milwaukee government, instructing the various heads of those departments what their budget target would be. And so they're required by law to submit something in response to what Dennis and his team have submitted. So that has all occurred. So you'll see tonight for many departments what the budget target was, what the department responded with. But that does not necessarily mean that's what's going to be the budget number as it is introduced by me in September. What we will be doing between now and September 25th, when I present the budget to the Common Council, is we'll be working with the different departments to fine-tune their budget requests. Again, their numbers came in response to our directive because we have to have, obviously, a puzzle here where we're putting all the different pieces of the puzzle together. But in several instances, you'll see that the budget, that the numbers that were submitted by the department, the police department, the fire department, two excellent examples of this, they did exactly what we told them to do. They submitted a budget to us. What that budget would mean some hardships that we are intending to avoid. We'll get a little bit more into detail on that. But this is not a situation where they've done anything wrong or the budget's office done anything wrong. This is just another step in the process. We're also going to talk, and Dennis is going to make some initial comments, and then I'm going to start off by talking about some of the challenges that we face as a community so that we all have a sense of this. And for those of you who are part of the administration, this is stuff that you've seen before. For some of you who are from the public, you may not have seen this before, but I hope you'll garner an appreciation of some of the challenges that we face as a city as a result of actions that are taken at other levels of government and how that has an impact on us. So before I get into that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis, whose team does a great job. We're very proud of our budget office. They work very closely with the Common Council. They work very closely with our comptroller, who is here today. We're pleased to have you here today. And other individuals who are interested in this. So I'm going to turn over to Dennis and allow him to make his initial comments.
All right, when we sit down and start the budget, which is sometime in February, we try to come up with allocations for the department, like the mayor said. We look at a lot of things, but first we look at what expenditure growth is typically, and that's typically about 3% on average that departments will see go up. Part of that's wages, regular wage growth that we see. Others are just the cost of operating, like the cost of salt and so forth. Then we'll look at the non-property tax revenues, and that's where it all gets disheartening. And when I see the increase of normally less than 1% in those, so then what we do is try to figure out what we have left that we can do to kind of fill that gap. Obviously, we can raise the property tax somewhat to try to fill that. However, the state does impose levy limits. We could probably stretch that as high as 4%, but in the long run, that doesn't help us either. That's not enough to fill in the whole gap. So what it would do within a year or two, we would be over the levy limit and then be penalized for that. So we do know that that's not sustainable for us. The other option is there is a referendum piece that we could explore with the levy limits. We haven't to date. There has been some successful tries by other municipalities. The next piece would be expenditure and service cuts, and we do rely somewhat on those. However, those are sometimes difficult to deal with. And then we also look for new revenue sources, but the state also put some constraints on what we can raise as revenue, because some of the types of revenue we raise may impact the levy limit. So what we raise in the revenue, we might have to decrease our levy for. So what it means in the end is a zero increase in net revenues. So it doesn't really help us to fill that gap. And now I'll turn it back over to the mayor for some slides.
So I'm going to go over about 6 or 7 slides here that give you sort of a framework of where the city is. And this one is one of the ones that I think is the best illustrator of the challenges we face. If you look here at the far left-hand corner, you can see in 2004, this was the Milwaukee Police budget, right here, about $180 million. Sorry. The amount that we received from the state of Wisconsin through the shared revenue program was right here. It was probably in the neighborhood of $230 million. So that allowed us to pay for, in essence, the entire police department budget. And in fact, you could get the entire fire department budget in the amount that we received from the state of Wisconsin through the shared revenue program. The shared revenue program is a grand bargain that was created by the state of Wisconsin and the municipalities in the early 1900s. And the theory behind it was, rather than having communities compete with each other on different taxes, having a tax balkanization, what would happen is the state would be the one that would collect the taxes, and they would distribute them. So the state took away our local ability to raise taxes other than the property tax. And so we are very, very, very reliant on 2 sources of revenue: the property tax and the shared revenue. So the property tax is the red number here. You can see how that has gone up gradually over the last 14 years. But I think the part that is most instructive is the past 3 years here. Here's the budget for the Milwaukee Police Department. And the reason I say 3 years is because 2016 is the year when the budget for the Milwaukee Police Department exceeded the entire property tax levy for the city of Milwaukee. Again, beginning in 2016, continuing in 2017, and this year in 2018, and certainly next year as well, the budget for the Milwaukee Police Department exceeds the entire property tax levy for the city of Milwaukee. Again, juxtapose that with 2004, where the budget for the police department did not come close to what the property tax levy was, and was obviously beneath what the amount of money we got from the state was in shared revenue. This line, the yellow line, you can see, rather than going up with the property tax line or with the budget line, has not only stayed the same, but has actually gone down over the last 12 years. So the state is giving us fewer dollars than it was 10 years ago through this program. So that creates a huge imbalance, a structural imbalance that we are going to have to deal with, because it simply is not mathematically sustainable. You can see this trend right here. Again, this is the police department. You can also see the property tax trend. The budget for the police department is rising faster than it is for the property tax. Now you might say, well, why? What's going on here? Well, the laws of the state of Wisconsin are such that the vast majority of costs for the police department, the vast majority of costs for the police department are personnel. That's the way it should be. You want it to be personnel. But you can see, because that's governed by state law, our ability to control that is limited. The reason that 2017 is a little higher here, actually somewhat higher, is that that was a year that we had a wage settlement agreement. So that put a couple years worth of dollars into that. Otherwise, it would have been a more gradual increase in that slope. So let's go to the next slide as well here. This is another way to make the same point in a little different fashion. This is the public safety and pension costs, because pension costs are a big part of this. And this is going to be something that you're going to see in a few minutes as well. And it's something that permeates the entire budget discussion, are the pension costs that the city has. This is, again, the red line is the shared revenue. This is the pension and police and fire. So now, again, to look at it another way, down here in 2006, Our pension costs and police and fire costs were $274 million. Our shared revenue and tax levy, our two sources of revenue, were $433.7 million. Now, fast forward to 2018. Again, these are our two major sources of revenue. The shared revenue and the tax levy together in one line. This is the pension plus the police costs plus the firefighter costs. So now we're getting to the point, and it happened in 2017, it dipped just $5 million beneath that in 2018, where if you take the pension costs, the police costs, and the fire costs, they exceed not only the tax levy for the city, but the tax levy plus the shared revenue amount. That means we are at a standstill as to where to go to fund the rest of city government. Some of it we can fund through fees, and that's happening more often in Department of Neighborhood Services, to some extent some other departments. It's relying on grants, which is something that we do in the health department. But again, you can see the structural problem that has developed over the last decade or two. So you might be saying, well, this is because the state is strapped. There's problems that the state is strapped, and we should suck it up. Because the state has to suck it up, we should suck it up as well. Well, what this tells you is, well, that's not exactly what's happened. If you go back to 2003, 2004, this is how much money the state raised in its general purpose revenue accounts, a little over $10 billion. This is how much it raised in 2016-17. So you can see there's essentially, over that period, a 70% increase in the amount of money that the state collects, 70% increase in the amount of money the state collects, yet we get a smaller amount. So again, it tells you that bargain that we had with the state has been broken. It has been broken. And until we either have the state reverse this or give us another source of revenue, we're going to continue to bang our heads against the wall trying to make this work. So let's keep going. This is the issue that really drives a lot of what's going on as well, and this is the pension costs. It was interesting to me when I became mayor, I was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and perhaps a little naive, because I became mayor in 2004, and you can see between 2004, actually beginning in 1996 to 2009, we did not have to make any employer payment to the pension system. Our system was so flush with cash at that time, we did not have to make an employer payment. Obviously, 2007, 2008 was a great recession, and things came down. And so we were then required to make an employer payment overnight. This number came overnight. It went from zero to basically $48 million line item that was created that we had to make towards our pension system to be honest and to be forthright with our retirees. It dipped down a little bit in 2011, 2012, and our fear was it was going to gyrate. And so the budget office, my office, the Common Council, we came up with a plan to stabilize this. And so what we put together, and you can sort of see this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had a 5-year plan where we would have, relatively speaking, constant payments towards the pension, so that you wouldn't have wild gyrations each year. It wasn't to game the system. It wasn't, in fact, we actually put in probably more money than we would have been required to had we done it year by year. But we wanted to have the stability. The reason this one's a little higher, 2017, is it was the final year of that 5-year plan, and so we just had to cap it off and make sure that we were meeting the obligations. And we did that successfully. 2018, 2019 is the beginning of a new 5-year plan. And this is where we have sort of good news and bad news to report. As we were doing these calculations, our estimates were that we were going to have to go from roughly $61 million to approximately $81 million, $82 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so, again, working with the budget office, working with the Common Council, we said, all right, beginning in 2018, 2019, we're going to have to up the amount that we are paying towards our pension. So we made that payment in 2018. We'll make the payment in 2019. But we recently got some good news, and this is in the good news category, And this is in part, I would say, and Dennis can correct me, this is in part because the stock market did so well last year, that rather than having to put that number in, we are going to be able to put a number more in the area of 70 million. So our thought was we were going to have to put $80 million in. Now we think it's going to be closer to 70 million. So that's reflected right here. So that's the good news, but it's not the end of the story. And we're going to go on and share with you what the challenge is that comes as a result of this. One of the challenges that we also face, and Marty's very familiar with this, is as we make our contributions to the pension system and as our actuaries analyze how much we have to make, there are assumptions. There are always assumptions. And historically, we have used a very high assumption as to our rate of return. In fact, I'd go so far to say that we are an outlier in terms of our optimistic view of how much we have to pay or how much we're going to get for our pension return. Now, in conversations I've had with people who are involved with this, their response has been, well, but we've met it. We hit the mark. We hit the mark. What are you concerned about? And I don't know that we've always exactly hit the mark, but it hasn't been bad. It hasn't been bad. But as I've looked at the literature, if you will, or if I've looked at those who are critical of us, it's that we're assuming an 8% return. And you can see some of the other systems, what they are assuming, that their return is by and large lower than ours. In fact, I'd say the average, and the next slide might show this, the average assumption of a return is more in the area of 7.5%. Again, we're here at 8%. You can see the bell-shaped graph as to what it is doing. So as we've discussed this, what we have concluded is the most fiscally responsible thing that we can do over the next 5 years, because we can't do it forever, is take those dollars that we thought we were going to have to put towards the pension, put them in a reserve account, and that has the net impact of lowering what our assumed rate of return is, if you follow what I'm saying. That we want to be more in the mainstream here of what we're assuming our rate of return is. Obviously, we want to do better than that. We want to outperform the field, but I don't want the retirees to think, okay, we're going to short them at some point, because we have done a very good job and we want to remain responsible. So as we're crafting the budget, what we're doing is we are going to set up a mechanism that will allow us to put those dollars in a place so that we can have, in effect, a lower rate of return. That means, doesn't mean any more spending, doesn't mean anything other than we're just going to be more careful with those dollars. Let's keep going here. We're getting near the end of my part, I think. Just so you understand what we're talking about here. Police and fire account for an estimated 81% of the total pension costs in 2018. Again, I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just telling you what the numbers say. And so the belief is that we have to, not only for the general city, which I think maybe the public is less sympathetic to, but for fire and police, we have to make sure that this system is funded adequately, because we have an obligation, obviously, to the people who serve this city. So just so everybody here is on the same page in understanding where the bulk of dollars are going for the pension system. So I think that might be the last slide, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dennis then. Let me touch on this too. So I could see these storm clouds coming several years ago. We had a lot of conversations about this, about, okay, what are we going to do? And I thought, all right, we're going to try a couple different options here. One is I decided that I would go on a charm offensive. And I would go to the state legislature and the governor and explain to them how much better the city of Milwaukee is doing, because we don't have the numbers here, but the economic turnaround in the city and the dollars we're generating for the state, it's remarkable. It's remarkable. You could have made the argument in 2007 that we were a city that relied on the kindness of the state. Now we are really punching above our weight in the amount of money we send to the state. And so I very politely, I shined my shoes, I had a nice tie, I went up there and talked to the governor and the legislators and said, hey, look, it's a new day in Milwaukee. We're bringing you a lot more money. Can you show us a little love? Can you share some of that money with us? And I might as well have been talking to that wall, because it went nowhere. I knew I had this problem with the budget, and in particular, the public safety aspects of the budget. So I thought, okay, that didn't work. I can't quit. I got to go back to I got to come up with Plan B. Plan B was to go to them to say, look, you're not going to give me more money. The Public Policy Forum and anybody who's looked at this have talked about how hamstrung the city of Milwaukee government is because of our inability to raise revenue, because of the reliance on the property tax and on shared revenue. You've got to give me, please, the authority to go to our residents and ask them whether they would accept a sales tax. And the way I want to pitch it is it would go to referendum. It would be a sales tax that we would dedicate towards public safety and crime prevention. The bulk of it would go towards public safety, but we felt it was important to have some crime prevention measures in there as well. I'll take it to my residents. If my residents say they want to spend the money, we'll spend the money. If the residents say they don't, then we won't. Again, I might as well have been talking to that wall because it didn't happen. So now, and you saw this in the last budget, where we were forced to close a number of firehouses. We had to reduce the strength of the police department because unlike other communities, unlike the federal government, we don't have the power to print money. And so those are the decisions we have to make. We literally have to balance the books. And so as we head into the governor's election, I want to raise this issue again. And you can see it. You can see it in public safety right now. We've had a very rough August already. I want to make sure that we are not reducing the size of our police department. And I want to make sure that we're not closing another firehouse. But in order to do that, we're going to have to, again, make some tough decisions locally. But in the long run, we are going to have to get the state to respond to this. And whether it's a Democratic governor or a Republican governor, I'm going to be making the same case. You just can't do this, especially in a city that is generating so much revenue for the state. You can't turn your back on us and make it difficult for us to do this job. So let me pause there, and now I'm going to turn it over to Dennis to run through the budget of a number of departments, and then obviously we'll answer any questions that anybody has.
What we'll first go through is some things that we have done to try to lessen the gap, so to speak, that we deal with every year. We have reduced positions, as you can see, 440 FTE since 2008. That's quite significant. The real good news, and I have to thank city employees for this one, but they've taken some of the burden on in healthcare and have now co-pays that they didn't formally have prior to 2000 or in 2011. Plus, we have a wellness plan that's done quite well, and the costs have actually gone down by $27.3 million from 2011. Not too many people can say that. The other piece of it is the premiums paid by the employees have remained constant for the last 7 years. The other thing we've done is worked very hard in workers' comp to try to lower the loss from injuries. We've done a pretty good job of that. On trend, it's about 15 million less. So you can see we've been working hard to come up with our end, but we still do need the help, as the mayor described. We also have now we do prepayments for our pension, and it's with a rate of return thing. But anyway, what I'll tell you is that it saves us $4.3 million per year. So that's been helpful to us. And now all city employees do pay the employee share of the pension contribution, which is also a good help. We're working on a stable general obligation debt plan. So what that does is that kind of keeps the lid on debt service, so we don't see big spikes that'll lead away from other services and may cause us to have to reduce those services. And then we have increased the annual levy by about 2.3% since 2004. Like I mentioned, this is a little bit more on healthcare, and this is probably a better way to picture it in the top thing. We saved about $100 million in what the trend had been. I didn't bring the graphic, but the graphic just goes way off the chart on what it could have been. So we've done a great job controlling healthcare costs. And then there's also, like this mentions that I did mention, there is the cost sharing with premiums and deductibles and so forth. And again, the 2017 actual is about $100 million when it was 138 before. And then this year we expect about 109.5 million. And next year, we're still working on it. There's been a small spike that we're dealing with, but we'll get there. And here's the chart. So here's the 140 way back when and where we currently are. This is a little bit about the allocation process that we did talk about. First, we look at the revenues and expenditures, like I mentioned before. Then based on what was left that we had to reduce, we asked departments to cut about $6 million. They did come in with a number of reductions, and their requests eliminated about 28.2 full-time equivalent positions. And please remember, this is the request. It's not what the proposed will be, but this is what we face. Departmental expenses are about 39% of our total tax levy budget, and then you can see some of the other numbers with debt service, workers' comp and health care, and the retirement system and so forth. This is the revenue side. As you can see, property tax makes up about 8.6% of that. Intergovernmental revenues, oh, sorry, it's not 8.6%. That was the increase, I'm sorry. But the intergovernmental looks like it'll increase about 0.5%. And you can see this is where the challenge that we face with revenues barely growing. So this is at the requested level. Here's how the property tax is allocated. A big chunk goes to retirement system and debt service. If I remember the numbers right, we're about at over 50% on both the employee retirement system and debt service of the total levy, which has increased dramatically over the years. And mainly due to pensions, because like the mayor said, we had no pensions way back when, in 1996. Here is the special funds. These are the water, the sewer, and parking funds. These are all self-supported funds. They survive on revenues that they generate internally. Here's a little bit more detail on each one. I kind of glossed over the bigger picture to get to the more detail. Like the mayor said, the police they met their allocation, and they did come in with about a 28 FTE reduction, and that was all to sworn strength. Obviously not something we want to look at doing, so what we have done is we found some ways to take care of this, and the staffing will be at the 1861 level, which was last year's level. We found ways to deal with that at this point, and we think we can accomplish that.
So let me again state that.
Yeah.
So what the police department did, which we appreciate, is that they met their target. It would have meant 28 fewer cops. We looked at that and thought, we don't want 28 fewer cops. If anything, we would like to have more police. So we have told them, and we're telling you, we are going to find a way to fund those 28 cops.
Yes. And we have found a way to do it, so we expect those will be fully restored. The other piece that we've picked up is there was a settlement with the ACLU, and we have to look at funding some consultant costs. It's about $300,000 a year, so we'll have to make room for that as well. The other piece in the police department, we're looking at the replacement cycle for police cars. This year, in 2018, we funded 50. They have asked for about 100. I don't believe we can afford 100, but they do have quite a need for police cars, and we'll be working that out with them.
me
Like to
Two comments on that. But before I do that, I want to introduce Alderwoman Mullally Coggs, who cleans up the budget after we introduce it. She oversees the effort at the Common Council level to make sure that it can be shepherded through. So we appreciate your being here. The ACLU settlement requires us to essentially find $300,000. So we're working to find that $300,000 for fees to oversee the police department, and field interviews in particular, I think, is what it's going to go to, or to analyze how we do in the field interviews. The third item up there tells you one of the challenges that we have as a city. We are seeing more police cars that have been damaged because of chases. And so you read a lot about high-speed chases in the city, and it's not just the people fleeing the police that sometimes have a car that gets damaged. Sometimes it's the police vehicle as well. So you've got normal wear and tear on the police vehicles, but in addition to that, because of more chases, this number is being affected as well. And so, again, people just have to understand where the costs are coming from. So when you have a problem like we have here in other cities with people who run red lights or drive recklessly, that has a ripple effect that goes beyond just that driver. And that's one of the issues that we're dealing with as well. Anything you want to say, Alderwoman? Okay.
Next, we'll talk a little bit about the fire department. In order to try to meet the allocation, the fire department proposed the elimination of yet another engine house and apparatus. And that's something, given that we eliminated 6 last year, that we feel we can't afford to do this year. So we do believe we found some money to restore that. And that will be restored, so we don't expect any more engine houses closed this year. The good news is they still, with the 6 that were reduced last year, or this year, excuse me, they still do meet the national standard for response time. Also, we intend to retain the 12 existing paramedic units, and also a cadet training program, which is kind of helps us fill in departing firefighters, and it does also help tremendously with our diversification of the department. So that's a great program, and we're intending to maintain that at the current 52 level. Department of Public Works, a lot of stuff going on there. This is just a small sample of some of that. What we're going to be working to do is maintain the curbside collection and recycling services at the same level. Part of that process involves a slight increase of perhaps 3% to the user fee for solid waste. But that just helps us cover that 3% growing cost that I showed you before. What we're looking at doing it is already in the process of being approved is to expand the drop-off at options at self-help. Basically, it'll be a program that'll help small contractors for a fee to drop off at the self-help. The hope is that if there were any of them that were finding it important that they do illegal dumping to try to reduce their costs. What they faced is large costs because they have to haul their debris all the way up to the landfill site, and we're charged a very large rate for that. So what we're proposing is a much lower rate for them in the hope that they would use our services instead of having to try to consider whether they go to the landfill or illegally dump. So the hope there is that it will reduce illegal dumping. We also intend to retain two programs that we feel are very important, the weekend box collection and the Clean and Green program. And as you see, probably for the last 15, 20 years, some sort of work being done on City Hall. Trust me, will be done within the next few years. But this is the next phase in the City Hall foundation will be funded at about $8 million. And also DPW handles the street replacements. We anticipate about 31 miles of streets done in 2019 versus the 29 that were done in 18. Public Library, when they put in their request, and now we're going to work very hard to avoid any hour reduction, and we believe we have a way to do that. But initially, when we asked them to meet their allocation, it was kind of questionable whether they would be able to do that or not without reducing hours. So they submitted a budget that had a large salary decrease, but we think we can deal with that and restore those hours, or make sure the hours don't get reduced. The capital budget will still include the neighborhood library modernization program. We're looking to get King done shortly, and then we'll move on from there to Center Street. Neighborhood services, their initial request is to eliminate 6 residential code enforcement inspectors.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that so people know why we're doing that?
Well, in part, it's for them to meet their allocation. However, they've tried to do some changes to the operation to absorb some of those costs or cuts, but they may have to be looking at, though, how they respond and inspect vacant buildings. So we're working with them to try to avoid, especially the dot point number 2, which they initially mentioned that they might have to look at vacant buildings on a complaint basis rather than on a quarterly basis. So we're working hard with them to deal with that, and we have some thoughts on that. The other piece that they've faced recently is a lot of state changes on the ways they can charge fees. Restrict the city somewhat, so it makes it that much more difficult to fund code inspectors because of those state changes. And some of the regulations have also changed on what we can enforce with code violations and how we can collect revenues as well.
Let me interrupt and state that again so that everybody has a sense of this. So for years, our battle with the state was, please don't cut our shared revenue, please don't cut our shared revenue. They've cut the shared revenue. We thought, well, that might be the end of their attacks. But they found an entirely new route to attack the city. And that is in the charges that we file, whether it's primarily Department of Neighborhood Services, but other departments, for different types of inspections. Landlord groups, business groups have gone to them. They've circumvented local government and gone to the state and said to the state, look, we don't want to pay local government for these activities. Can you eliminate or reduce the amount that local government can charge? And the legislature and the governor were more than happy to do backward somersaults to these groups and say, yeah, fine, we'll do that. That has another impact on us because, as I said, by far the major sources of our revenue are property tax and shared revenue. But because of those cutbacks, we were forced to rely also on fees. Now you've got outside groups that are going to the state to say, don't let them charge us for anything. And sort of like tighten that vice around them even more, tighten it more so that we can continue to starve local government. And that's what's going on at the state level with both the legislature and with the governor.
Sure doesn't help doing budgets, that's for sure. The last piece here is there might be a change in how they have to look at rat abatement. It's just how we do it and how effective we can be, but we'll be talking about that.
And I think that's more not reducing our efforts to reduce rats. It's how do we do it in a way that isn't just geared towards an episode. In other words, we don't believe that rats travel to a specific house and then don't go anywhere else in that entire neighborhood. But our response is episodic, oftentimes, where we'll have someone go and deal with that house. We think, okay, what about all the other houses in the neighborhood? Is there a better way for us to do it? So again, from my perspective, it's how do we do this better? And it may require an effort, a public effort, to get homeowners and renters and others more involved in this as well. Because we're not going to get out of the rat reduction business, but at the same time, we have to do it in a way that's effective.
Yes. The health department, not a lot to say right now. At this point, we're just maintaining the 2018 budget level, and we'll work to make the appropriate changes to that budget. The waterworks, the PSC has regulated that we do 18 miles of water mains in 2019, and that's what the budget includes at this point. The budget also includes the replacement of 1,000 lead service lines, including some daycares that we may not have finished yet. The sewer maintenance budget will continue to focus on infiltration and inflow. Capital budgets will provide a 90-year replacement cycle, which is the standard. The other piece is there's been a mandate where we're going to be looking at disconnecting downspouts in the combined sewer area. It's an attempt to reduce clear water from the treatment system. Parking fund, if you've seen them, maybe you used them yet already, but we're replacing a lot of the meter signs, those big boxes that you see in the middle of the block, and also any coin with multi-space meters. Those you'll see will be a meter with basically takes care of two spots, the one on either side of the meter. Those will also be smart meters, which will hopefully, and we believe will, use credit cards much more quickly and also allow for us to collect better data. The other piece is a continuation of the MacArthur Square parking structure renovation. About $3.2 million is in the 2019 request. The other big part of our budget is the capital improvements budget. Actually, if you look at point 3 first, the request came in at $123.9 million. That would be a lot for us to borrow, and what the problem with that would be is we'd have to face large debt service increases that would push out or crowd out other services that were funded through the operating budget. So the goal here is to try to get to a capital budget that has borrowing that's roughly equal to the amount that we retire every year, and we believe that will be about $78 million in 2019. So the goal will be to reduce a number of things that are funded. So it's all about choices, and we'll have to look at prioritizations, and we are working with the departments on that.
Before you leave that, because
Sure.
this is important to me as well. If you can go back one slide. Look at 2012 there. What our levy-supported borrowing was $74.5 million. You can see it went up for several years there. We have made a concerted effort, and again, the council has been supportive of this, to bring it back down in the mid-75 range. We think it's important for us to do that. And the reason it's important for us to do that is, let's go back to the pension. Because for the first 5 years that I was mayor, our GO borrowing was in the neighborhood of $74 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. So but now, in addition to that GO borrowing, adding on to it the $70 million pension every year, pension payment every year, tells you that those two items, GO borrowing and the pension payment, is in the neighborhood of $150 million. Our goal is to keep our tax levy under $300 million. Even doing that, that means that those two items, the general obligation borrowing and the pension payments, basically constitute half of the property tax levy for the city. Again, another red flag that we all have to be mindful of for the continued fiscal sustainability of the city is we have to make sure that we're controlling our capital borrowing because of those pension payments. And that's why I've become much more of a stickler on this. I think that there's almost a perception sometimes, well, let's just borrow the money. The problem with borrowing the money is you have to pay it back. That's the problem. And so as attractive as that may be from time to time, and I think it's true in our personal lives, not just, it's true for everybody, it's human nature, let's borrow the money. The fact is we now see what the impact, we always knew what the impact was, but given the pension payments, it's going to squeeze things out in the future if we don't keep those costs under control.
This is a little example of what was included in the request. Like I mentioned before, there was $8 million for the foundation restoration, another 1.4 for the next step in the library, neighborhood library modernization program. There's some money for strong strong home loan program in interim properties, about $2 million. There's a code and compliance program that we fund that helps fund projects for homeowners that might that are facing a code violation. And it also is there to hopefully prevent that property from going into foreclosure because of continually added fees that we charge for inspection, reinspection, and fines. Local and high-impact streets were requested at $13.6 million. That's basically the street paving program for the local roads. Lead service lines, like I mentioned with the water department, will be at about 1,000 lead service lines, with the city share being about $3.7 million. Part of that will be funded between borrowing and an assessment to the property owner. And then the other piece that I mentioned that we'll have to sort out with the police department, and it's always a tough decision on how many vehicles to replace, because like the mayor said, the crashes, the fleet's getting much older on average, so we have to deal with that somehow. So that's adding pressure on whether we can need versus what we can afford. So that will be a challenge for us. Some takeaways we'd like, and please add anything if you want to add on the first one, but obviously we want to be a little bit more like the other peer cities that have a lot of other funding sources than just the property tax. Those other cities are able to also have less reliance on shared revenue. Not that I'm asking for a cut. I'm just saying they have those other alternatives that help them fund their programs that we do not have, and we're just seeking to get that referendum authority so we can see if the citizens would like a sales tax, and it will help us to stabilize the budget. State shared revenue, of course, still has had declined in the past, and it makes it that much more difficult to do the budget. If it had increased at the rate of inflation, we'd have $100 million more dollars, which would make it a lot easier to do these budgets, I can tell you that. The other piece is the continued slow growth in non-property tax levy, and the continual increases that we'll face in pension contributions, not only the ones that we see immediately, but also the long-term like the mayor brought up with the rate of return, that a lower rate of return, it will be actuarially determined that we'll need to make a higher contribution when that is lowered. So we do have to plan for the future as that continues to happen, so we can cover our pension liabilities. So far, employee health benefits have been a very good positive in the budget. However, it's one of those things that may not last forever, so we have to always consider what the potentials are there and keep an eye on that. The other piece, like we've showed you at the beginning, is the commitment to the police have been substantial, and capital, we will I'm not going to be able to say it today, I guess. But capital improvements, we're going to prioritize to control the debt service expenditures so they don't rise and crowd out other operating costs that we need to fund. So with that, this is how the process has worked so far and will continue. May 8th is when we receive the budgets from the departments, and that date through September, we will be working with the mayor to come up with a proposed budget. Of course, today you're at the August 15th meeting, and September 25th will be when the mayor proposes the budget to the council. The council has meetings, or the finance committee has meetings scheduled through October 5th through the 17th, and a schedule is available if you'd like to see that. On October 8th, there'll be a joint meeting with the mayor and the council. It'll be a public hearing to get your comments on the proposed budget. Lastly, the council will adopt the budget on November 13th. And with that ends the formal part of presentation, and here's some contact information. If you'd like to get a hold of me and don't want to write it down, I do have cards here. So if you'd like a card, you can come in and you can call me anytime, and I'll gladly talk about the budget. Hopefully I won't bore you to death. So thank you.
Again, Alderman, anything you want to add?
Is anybody?
Marty Madison, anything you want to add? 1 second. Anything you want to add, Comptroller? Okay. Yes, sir. Floor is yours.
As you referred to earlier, Mayor, I mean, in my lifetime, I've never seen as much investment coming into the city of Milwaukee as what we've seen in recent years. Public, private, in-state, out-of-state, out-of-country investments coming here like never before, which is really exciting. I mean, in my entire life, I've never seen as much activity as we got going on right now, and the outlook looks very, very good. However, in watching the news just recently, I was reminded that Milwaukee also is still on the top 10 list of the most dangerous, highest violent crime rate cities in the nation, right? And we're talking about budget constraints and the high budget constraints relative to the police department, the fire department, and pensions. Certainly that's an area of our budget that we cannot afford to actually cut back on. And I also can see that the money just isn't there, right? It's not there. We're talking about pest control and automotive repairs, for crying out loud. I mean, that gets a little bit ridiculous in terms of the overall city budget. I understand the structure simply isn't right. You look at other states, and cities can't keep more of their money. I guess my question for you is, how do we flip this dilemma with the state and stop asking them if we can keep more of our money and start demanding that we're going to keep more of our money? What do we need to do as a city to make sure that the money that we're generating and paying into the state system, enough of it is coming back to our city to provide the services that we need as citizens within the city? Because if we don't fix the violent crime problem, all this development and people coming back to the city, sooner or later, it's going to get reversed and they're going to go back out. So how do we flip this around? What do we need to do as a city to go to the state and say, hey, look, we need to keep more of our money?
Well, I love your question. I couldn't have planted a better question. It's part of the reason that there are times when I feel like I am running full speed into a wall. Because, again, I try to use every mechanism I can to make the case. Look, we're fighting back here. the turnaround of this city has been nothing short of remarkable over the last 10 years. Yet, you look at who derives the most fiscal benefits from it in terms of government, it's the state government. Because we are generating this money for the state. And I like the state, I don't have anything against it, but we have not been able politically to make the case. My fear is that the governor and a lot of people in the legislature believe that the only function of local government is police and fire protection. We haven't even gone into snow removal and garbage pickup and that, but you can't starve us for resources to deal with rat abatement, or to deal with vacant lots, or to deal with nurses visiting homes. Those are all legitimate functions that a city needs to perform as well. But I think that there is a philosophy out there that we have to starve local government. I think that's what's going on. And so it's a political question, and I want to put this question to the candidates running for state office, is, okay, here's the problem. How do you solve this problem? How do you address this problem? And I think the people of the city, our collective voice, I mean, I'm obviously going to continue to do it. I need others to do it. I need people that live here to do it. I need institutions that are here, both public and private institutions.
How do we get some excitement around the investment that the companies here in Milwaukee and us to do this? Because if it's just you going there with your hat in your hand asking, they're just going to push back and they're not going to give us money. So how do we...
Well, we continuously do, frankly, we continuously try to find ways to do it. We go to the business community and say, hey, help us. Now, what happened 2 years ago with the business community is they said they would not oppose our attempts to get a sales tax. That's a lot different from we're going to be with you to get it. Their argument would be they don't want to do it in a piecemeal fashion. They think that there are other places that need, when I say other places, there's other needs like the county parks or cultural amenities that need a sales tax as well. My response is, look, I can't wait 2 years. Now, again, we had to wait 2 years. I don't want to wait another 2 years because I see on a daily basis the impact that crime has on this city, and we need the resources to deal with it. And a lot of it's going to go to police, but it can't be just police. There are other things, and the jobs front is a big part of this. I've been on my soapbox recently about, look, I go to all of these meetings about labor shortages, and I hear politicians crowing about how low our unemployment rate is. And yet I have a central city here on the north side, and to a smaller extent on the south side, where we are seeing massive unemployment levels, particularly for young African-American men, not so much for young Hispanic, but still there's an issue there. And we have to find a way to have people have jobs in this city, not to take a bus for an hour. Let's do what we can to have the positive economic development here as well. So I'm going to continue to speak out on that. I'm trying to get as many allies to have their voices heard. But you've got an alderman. I don't know if you've contacted your alderman. All those are ways for us to amplify the voice. We have to amplify the voice. We have to repeat the message, and it has to come from more quarters than just my quarter. Other questions, comments? Things we're doing wrong? Things we're doing right? You're a very quiet crowd here tonight. Oh. Going one? Oh, Alderman.
I just want to, so many microphones. I just want to echo the mayor's sentiment about the need to get support from the state. And I would go one step further to say, in the absence of that state support, we are going to have to be more innovative with the resources that we have available to us to help address the public safety issues that you talk about. In the last couple of days, I've had the opportunity to go door to door in a neighborhood near 10th and Burleigh, where Eric Williams, the 28-year-old, lost his life, and where his 4-year-old son is still fighting for his life with 4 bullet holes in his chest and arm. Today I had the opportunity to visit that young boy and see him fighting for his life and doing better and doing well. And then on the way to pick up my son before I came here, I drove past the nearly 100 people gathered near 6th and Center because of the 2 men who lost their lives today. Truth is, whatever it is that we're doing is not enough. Truth is, with the over $300 million that we're spending on the police department, it's not enough. And we are strapped for dollars, strapped for resources. We're not hiding the purse anywhere. But I would hope that not just the mayor, but residents who are recognizing the need for there to be a change and a difference in neighborhoods throughout this city begin to get motivated to be engaged and to hold accountable all officials who have influence on the resources that have the ability to flow to the city of Milwaukee, including state and the governor and all of that. It shouldn't be just the politicians fighting for these more resources. That's one. And two, in the event that the state does not allow for us to do a sales tax, allow for us to get more share of revenue, do all the many things they could very well do that would help us financially be able to have resources to do more of the things that we all know could help impact and stop the rate of violent crime that we see in the community. We still have to continue to do the work of finding those innovative, creative, and grassroots ways that we can stop the bloodshed on the streets of Milwaukee. Because honestly, I sit in front of you exhausted from dealing with mothers who've lost their babies, from running to press conferences, and walking through neighborhoods where people are scared to let their kids play in the front yard. And it's stuff that we can do as politicians, but it's so much more that the people on every block, in every neighborhood, in every house could do with whatever resources that we have. So I'm with the political push at the state. I think more of us have to galvanize around that. But I also recognize that simultaneously, we have to be doing more on a grassroots level with whatever resources we have to stop the violent crime in our community. Thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're speaking for the entire city.
Well, I mean, what would be the top 2 structural changes that you want to see, right, in how our taxation system set up in the state city that would provide the funds that we need? You know, what would be the top 2 changes that you would recommend? And, I mean, is there another city-state tax structure that you would say that you wouldn't want to mimic or mirror, for example, Minnesota, Minneapolis? I mean, is there a structure out there?
Sure, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the Public Policy Forum, and I don't know how much of a geek you are, the Public Policy Forum in the last year has done an analysis of many of our peer cities and looked at the revenue structure of how mid-sized American cities raise their money. And we stand out like a sore thumb because of our reliance, again, on those 2 major sources. We stand out because such a high percentage of our revenue comes from property tax, and we stand out because a high percentage of our money comes from the state through the shared revenue program. The third place where we stand out is what I call the handcuffs, because we are so handcuffed in our ability. A lot of cities have sales tax, some have income tax, some have parking tax, some have utility tax, some have entertainment tax. We've got none of that, and not only do we have none of that, we've got a governor and a state legislature that are going after our fee generation. And so, number one, what I would like, and this might be dreaming, having now tried this so many years in a row, is to get the state to honor the shared revenue agreement. And I think politically, that's a tough sell. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop doing it. In fact, the League of Municipalities 2 years ago, when they were putting together the legislative priorities, they, in essence, initially didn't even have that. And we pay a lot of money towards the League of Municipalities. And I said, what good is it for me to be a member of the League of Municipalities if you're not advocating for us for shared revenue? So, poof, because we pay a large part of their budget, that went to the number one priority. How much they pushed it, they didn't have the power to push it. Again, you've got, right now, the majority in the legislature and the governor run what I would call an anti-urban agenda. And Wisconsin's not alone. You see this in a lot of major states where a large city, the political makeup of a large city is different from the political makeup of other parts of the state. And that's certainly true in Wisconsin, but it's probably true in states like Tennessee as well. It may be true in Missouri, places like that. So number one, to answer your question directly, is shared revenue. Number two, of course, is to get flexibility for a different revenue source. But that's just in that lane, if you will. The other place where I need to have a dramatic change is the approach taken to create jobs in the central city. And right now, if you look at Century City, which is located roughly on 30th and Capitol Drive, we've got some 60 acres there that we, the city, have put over $30 million cleaning up. Again, I get frustrated when I go to these meetings and people say, well, there's a skills gap. And yeah, I'll concede there's a skills gap. But there's also a very serious geography gap. And it's as though some people have given up on economic development in the poor parts of this community. And I haven't, and I know the Alderwoman hasn't, but I need the business community, I need state government, I need county government to make it a priority to get jobs there. Because, again, if we're going to change this horrible dynamic that we have, and August has been horrible from a violence standpoint, part of this is creating hope in some of these neighborhoods where economically you don't see a vitality that has to be there. And you just can't have that in America. And my argument has been, again, the politicians who say, oh, we got record low unemployment. My response to that is, if we do not address the economic and employment challenges of the central city when we are at record low unemployment, when will we have the will to do that? This is the time, because if you've got Amazon that's going to an Oak Creek site, which is what they're talking about, and getting funding, $20 to $30 million funding from government to do that, and then you've got people who are taking a bus an hour from here to there, because it takes you basically 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get from your home on a bus to the freeway flyer, then wait 5 or 10 minutes. Then you take the freeway flyer another 20, 25 minutes and walk 5 to 10 minutes, and all of a sudden you're spending an hour on the bus for a $12.50 an hour job. And then you come home another hour. And society then criticizes the parents who don't go to the parent-teacher conferences, or kids who don't get immunized, because they're traveling an hour each way to work. That's the dynamic we have to change. We have to have a real economic life in the central city, and the city can create the jobs. And again, so Amazon, I'll use an example. If we had gotten Amazon at the Century City, I describe that as a positive atomic bomb. I mean, if you dropped in 2,000 jobs into the central city, think of the positives that come from that.
So as it relates to budget funding, if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting that the increases in jobs are going to help the deficit or budget spending? Is that...
No, it's a different track altogether. Again, you've got government programs, you've got public safety, you've got DNS, you've got the library, you've got public health. That's what government can do. But the separate part is economic life. And so I'm not asking for government programs. I'm not asking for government jobs. I'm saying, look, we have to create economic vitality in the central city of Milwaukee. And you look at Alderwoman Cog's district. She's doing a great job in Bronzeville, and we're fighting tooth and nail to get economic development there. And it's happening. But if we had dramatic investments in people bringing jobs there. Now, I am not Pollyanna, where I understand public safety concerns are huge in making some of these decisions. And that's why it becomes such a challenge, is nobody can be surprised if an employer is reluctant to locate someplace if their employees or their customers can't walk safely to their car or the bus. And so that has an impact on it too. But I go back to New York City, and Central Park that used to be infested with crime, Times Square, nobody went to, there was a will, there was a public-private will to change that, and it happened. I think that the public will here at the local level is there, but I need the public will at the county level, the state level, and the private sector to say, look, we have to change this. We have to change this, and we can change it, and I believe we can.
And just to add to that, truth is, throughout the history of this city, violent crime was at some of the lowest levels when employment was at the highest levels. So it is a direct correlation between people having family supporting jobs and the level of violent crime that we see in the city.
All right, well, stay tuned, and thank you very much for coming tonight.